All right, so welcome everybody. This is the Downey First Christian Church podcast. This is something that we started to do actually when COVID, not when it just started, when we're like in the middle of COVID, and we started calling it the Lockdown Podcast because we're trying to decide what name would work. And Lockdown Podcast, we called it that because we were in lockdown, and so we don't have a name for it right now. So DFCC podcast. Downey First Christian Church podcast. I don't know.
Kind of like that lockdown.
You like the lockdown one? I think we might just decide to call it that. What is it that you like about that name? I mean, it has a nice ring to it. It definitely has a nice ring to it.
It's unique. I don't think I've ever. It'd actually be a good name for a band.
The Lockdown.
Lockdown.
Yeah.
It's just. I guess it's reminiscent of what we went through. But I think it has a real good ring to it.
Yeah. And if anyone asks, like, why do you call it the Lockdown? Well, because we started out when we were in lockdown.
So there's actually a story behind the name.
Exactly.
Exactly. There's a good history to it.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who I'm talking to, this is Fernando. I always call you Alarcón.
Yeah, that's
Alarcón. How do they say it when someone is an American trying to say your name? How does it come out?
It's been butchered.
It's one of those.
It's usually Alarcón, which I guess you sound it out, but Alarcón.
Alarcón. Yeah.
It's rare to hear someone actually say
Alarcón. Yeah. So most of you guys probably know that I grew up as a missionary in Chile, and in Chile we have a very famous comedian called Fernando Alarcón. So immediately when I hear your name, that's what comes to my mind.
Well, I am kind of a comedian.
You are?
No.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So we were just talking as we were getting ready. You and I were just kind of hinted on it a little bit. This whole idea of gratitude. Of having because I asked you how's your day, and you were like, yeah, it was so far so good, and I was just talking about almost. Like you can have two people that have the exact same day. One person can say it was terrible because of this and this and that. And another person will take the bad and say, you know what? I'm still grateful because all these good things happened. Yeah. So how do we develop that sort of mindset? Because I feel like you're really good at that mindset. Like I consider you a positive person in general.
Well, like I said, I take a stoic approach to it, and that's kind of a philosophy thing. Just kind of what's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I even, to put it more in a biblical text, I always just think of, let tomorrow worry about itself.
Yes.
In the grand scheme, like I was telling you, my faith overpowers everything.
Yeah.
And when I see what I have in the grand scope of everyone around us, I mean, just in other countries, I mean, just the situation that's going right now in Ukraine.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I might have caught some traffic here, someone cut me off.
Yeah.
But there's always more good than there is bad.
Yes.
And I look at what God's provided me with, and the good always going to overshadow the bad.
Yes.
In most cases.
Yeah.
Some people really hit a bad skid, but for the majority of us, I think it's just really more focusing on what's good in your life as opposed to what's bad. And a lot of the things that we do that end up being bad to us, it's really self-inflicted sometimes. And it's just a learning curve. And that's kind of where I take the step back. I allow myself some emotions, and I said, okay, what did I do? What didn't I do?
Right.
Why am I here?
Right.
And usually that just kind of helps me get more of a perspective.
Right.
How can I avoid these things in the future?
So can you tell people what you do for work?
Yes. So I'm a program manager. So basically what I do is I run 4 different programs for an independent agency that works with the regional center of California, which there's multiple. Primarily we deal with South Central Los Angeles Regional Center and the Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center. So I work with people with developmental or intellectual delay. So I do an assessment on them, and I try to gear a plan to help them become more independent. To hopefully in the future they live on their own, or if they continue to decide to live on their own, I'm able to implement certain generic services and products so that they can continue to live a more fruitful life on their own. Because they're always going to need some sort of assistance. So that's kind of helped me gain perspective in my life. Once again, the little things that we call, have the ability to do a lot of things compared to some of the people that I have to assist with. So, in that aspect, I'm very blessed. And don't really have much to complain about.
So what would you say? Because here's my question: was there a moment or a stage in your life where that changed? In other words, you were more negative at one point, and then something happened, and you became more positive or gained a more mature perspective on life.
I would. Yeah, I was kind of a negative Nancy at first.
Were you really?
Yes, I was. It was kind of a woe is me kind of a thing. I'm doing this. Why is this person doing it? And I think I'm better than they are. I'm not as good, I'm not as bad as they are, kind of a thing. So it was something that it took time, but definitely I think I would have to say probably about 15 years ago, it's where I kind of started changing more. I mean, I was on that transition, but that's slowly because I was more getting into my faith. But about 15 years ago, as soon as I started doing this work, I'm like, you know what? All these little things that I'm able to do, that I have the ability to do, I apply for jobs, and maybe I don't get them, but hey, I actually have an ability to apply for work. And I'm getting judged on the merits of my work, and not because, the people I work with, it's, they already have like 2 strikes with them. They have a disability. Some of the people don't even want to give them a chance.
Right.
So it was that transition of like, I have my whole health. I have my whole mental health. I really don't have anything to complain about.
Right.
And it was about 15 years ago where that switch just kind of like went full tilt. And it even helped me in my faith as well, because I always like to share about my faith, apparently.
Yeah, of course.
But it was a thing where it's like, Lord, forgive me. You pretty much raised me, allowed me to be healthy, and I have really nothing to complain about.
Yeah.
Times will be tough, of course, but outside of that, who doesn't have a tough life, or who doesn't have a tough moment, or and life will, obviously deal us with punches as we go through, but it's, we just got to keep getting up.
That's right.
And moving forward. And it's most definitely about 15 years ago in this job, when I started doing these assessments and meeting some of these families, and it's just like, wow, I really don't have much to complain about.
That's amazing. So this job really changed you.
Yeah.
I mean, this, it kind of coincided with the spiritual awakening also.
Yes.
In your relationship with God and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It made me feel almost petty with some of the things that I was complaining about. I'm like, what am I really, am I really accessing my faith? I mean, even in that, I'm in my right mind to access my faith. So it was really eye-opening, and I think God put me in this position. One, I like to help people. Yeah. But 2, it's just something that I think God used this job like, hey, look, what are you complaining about?
Right.
And it just, like I said, it was eye-opening. Sometimes those are the things we need in life.
Of course. Yeah, it's amazing, because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and it's a problem of perspective. It's just simply perspective. It's knowing that your world is much bigger than your world, especially in America. We have a tendency to have a lot of entitlement and think that, if we don't get our coffee right away, it's like, it just ruins your whole day, but then all of a sudden you see, like the war in Ukraine, and you're like, these families being separated, and these, these guys staying home. They're like, I'm going to fight for my country. Yeah. And that's really impacted me. I've been watching the news very closely and having really interesting conversations with my kids about this, when it comes to why these people are staying behind and why they're feeling so strongly about, how this patriotism came out. And they're like, we're not going to allow for this foreign government to invade us. We've had our freedom that we fought for 30 years ago. We've been a republic for 30 years, and we're going to go down with, I mean, it's a really scary thought, but it's really inspiring at the same time.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
As someone who served in the military, when I see I was just an ordinary person. I just happened to volunteer. But when you see, or you hear the stories of men walking their families to the border, okay, and now I got to go back. And it's like men of all ages, teenagers, elderly, people with no training whatsoever. It makes me wonder, like, if I hadn't received any military, would I be like that? I mean, I consider myself to be patriotic, and I would like to I would defend this country.
Yeah.
I mean, technically I took the oath to defend the country, but I look at them and it's just, these are your ordinary guy who probably was a baker, maybe somebody was a pastor.
Yeah.
Who knows? And it's very inspirational to me. And it really hits home because I just, like you were saying, we have such a sense of entitlement here that, we think, we're being censored, or we're being this, or we're being that. Even at the most difficult time, we're not being pressured into thinking, okay, this is the last time I'm going to see my family, and I have to face this overwhelming army, which, I mean, in all honesty, they probably don't have a chance. They don't have a chance.
No.
So death is imminent for them. So it's inspiring to see the human spirit of how a love for something like a country can really make them make a difficult choice. And I have nothing but admiration for those Ukrainians.
Yeah, and in this whole, the crisis in Ukraine, you're seeing the best of humanity. Also, you're seeing the worst of humanity,
unfortunately,
and then you're seeing the best of humanity. You got Poland that is wide open borders. Just come in, we'll help you. There was this family that they drove from a distance. I don't know exactly what country, but they drove through, into where the Ukrainians were showing up in Poland, and they had this sign that they showed up in 2 cars, and they had, we've got space for 6 people for free, stay as long as, and that's just multiply that by, I think it's like 1 million people,
something like that
at this point,
Wow.
And it's, it's amazing. It's amazing. And then it begs the question, like, then there's our kids and this generation, it makes me think of that phrase. I don't know who said it. I can't remember. Maybe you're familiar with this phrase. It's, hard times create hard men. Hard men create easy times. Easy times create soft men. Soft men create hard times.
I've seen that. I've actually seen it on a meme. Yes. I don't recall who said it, but it's very true.
Yeah. Where would you say we're at now with this? I mean, it's an obvious question, I guess, because it concerns me. I mean, I'm not like overly like concerned about it, but I think the answer is pretty obvious, right?
I just turned 50, and I see this generation, and it seems like just yesterday I was 18, and I see this generation. I'd be remiss not to say that I fear, because I don't see a sense of backbone to want to stand up for certain things. It's more, how can I say, almost like seeker friendly. You want to be you don't want to take a stand for anything. And I understand confrontation isn't always easy, but confrontation also builds character, and confrontation doesn't necessarily mean that it has to come to physical terms. It just means having a certain conviction. And I see a lot of our youth not knowing or having any conviction, and they really don't I don't want to say lack of respect, but they don't see the older generation as something to model themselves by. It's like, it seems like everything just kind of gets thrown to the wayside. It's like, oh, well, we don't do things like that anymore.
Right.
It's like, well, I understand times change, certain things, we have to evolve in essence in some things, but there are some things that have been placed there that are irrefutable, that they actually work.
Yeah.
And I think our current generation is lacking some of that fortitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those values, maybe.
Yes. Basic values. And, I might be wrong. I hopefully I am wrong, because, we're dependent on them.
Yeah.
They're the future, but I don't see that, a lack of commitment. Things are always looking for the easy way. If things get too hard, it's just, I don't want to try it.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's not the way I was raised. My parents were basically, look, if everything was easy, everyone would be doing this.
Right.
And I have that attitude, and that's the attitude we always tell our son when he's upset. And I'm like, well, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
There's a reward when you actually finally get something done that was difficult. And I think we've kind of raised children now that we try to make everything so easy for them that when they come up against some friction, they're like amazed. It's like, well, what's going on? Why isn't this easy?
Like something's wrong.
Something's wrong. Why am I getting in my way? I'm like, well, that's not the way the world works.
Right. Or why is it not fun?
Yeah.
Right. Have you heard of that one? Yeah.
I've heard that one.
It's like, this is not fun. It's like, was it supposed to be fun?
Was it supposed to be fun? Yeah. It's like exercise. When I get up and go jogging, this is not fun, but no, it's good for me. As I'm getting older, I need to start doing more of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing that we've hindered our youth with, trying to make things. And as a parent, we try to make things easy for our children because, we don't want them to stumble with the same things that we went through. But I think sometimes we become too much of helicopter parents. And I think that's really gone on even in the educational system.
Yeah.
And kids are kind of soft almost, everything's almost expected. Well, I did this and I should get this. It's like, well, it's not the way it really works.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'm wrong,
No, I don't think you're wrong. So how do we solve it?
Well, if I had that answer, we'd probably have a bigger studio. We'd have a bigger budget, Pastor, because I could give a lot more. I think as far as people with faith, like ourselves, who believe in God, I think it's just sticking to our guns and preaching the true gospel, and telling people, look, my identity isn't Fernando Alarcón, who happens to be Hispanic, who happens to be this. My identity is in Christ.
Yeah.
And I think if we stick to that as a group, as the church body, and we can show them that these, traditions that we're doing, though they seem old, though they seem antiquated, and they, like we're living in the Stone Age or Bronze Age, there's a reason why we're still moving forward.
That's right.
There's a reason why 2,000 years later,
we're still here.
We're still here.
We're still here.
We're still here. And I think it starts with us, to be that will and that power that will show up. We're supposed to be a salt to the world, right?
Yep.
So, and I think sometimes the church is lacking in that. But I definitely think that we as believers have to stay true to our faith, live our life by examples. I always like to say, people would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon.
Yeah.
Because if like just how we start off, well, how is it that, you have all these issues and you feel fine? I go, well, let me talk to you about my faith. Let me talk to you about Jesus.
Yeah.
And it opens up, and they might not want to believe it. They might think I'm crazy, but there's something there because I'm living it.
Yep.
And I think that starts with us.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like we're trying to reach out here to the community of Downey. I honestly think that that's how you just you do it, one person at a time.
Yeah.
One community at a time. Obviously that it's probably a little more complex than that to solve an issue like that, but definitely with the youth that we have here, it's a start.
Yeah.
Because, they have peers that'll be seeing them.
Right.
And watching them grow and then wondering, well, there's something different about them.
Yeah.
Why aren't they struggling like I'm struggling?
Right.
And then when you share, I am struggling like you, but let me talk to you about Jesus.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's a really good way, because we have, we have ways of sharing our faith and evangelizing and, explaining what the gospel is to people, and people can understand it, intellectually, death and resurrection and forgiveness and grace and all those things. Definitely. But it just, when it becomes flesh in you, it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, because I grew up in the Christian church. I've talked about this before. Several generations of pastors, and I grew up. I mean, the church was my whole life. But I really never had an encounter with Christ. I knew about Him. I saw Christianity as more of an activity, or more like a social gathering, more than an actual relationship with a person. But that all changed when he became real. I mean, I don't know if I've shared with you my story, but it's basically coming out of high school. I was in the church and everything. Out of high school into college, I went off the deep end. I tried everything, came to a point in my life where I really didn't have any real friends left. And then I decided I was going to go back to the church. I was going to go back to God. And I still remember that moment when I did. I had a cigarette in my hand, coffee in the other hand, and just kind of like, God, this is it. I'm done. I'm going to go back to you. But I was, drinking, every weekend, driving drunk, getting high every single day. That was my life. That was my life. And so that moment I'm like, I'm stopping, because I knew what I had to do. Like I knew I had to go back to God. And so I made that decision, and that decision lasted for about 2 days. And then I went back to doing everything else. But the interesting thing is I made a promise to God, but God I forgot the promise that I made to God, but God didn't forget the promise that I made to him in the sense of turning my life over. And what was interesting is that so 2 days later, I went to this party that I shouldn't have been there, because I'd promised God I wasn't going to do this anymore. And for the first time, I'd never gotten a DUI. I'd never gotten stopped by the police. I'd never gotten in a car accident, nothing. That day, when I was driving back, that night when I was driving back, got pulled over and got a DUI, spent the night in jail. And that was the moment when I knew who God was, and I knew who I was. And I don't know if you notice, I always pray, not always, but I pray this a lot, like my dependency on God. Like I know how dependent I am on you. I realized that in that moment. I realized who I was, and I realized who God was, in the sense that I knew that I couldn't change myself at that moment. That I did not have the ability to just quit my addictions. Yeah. There's no way, And I knew who God was, because I knew that God was the one that was going to do it, not me. And so that's kind of when that transition happened. So that's what I mean when I say that the word kind of became flesh, like it became real. It's almost like it was staring me in the face the whole time, and I could like understand the concepts, but then when it becomes real, like what you were sharing, it changes everything. Oh yeah. It changes you completely.
Yeah. That's the key there. Knowing that it's not you. You can't do anything. Correct. You can't change yourself. Yeah. You can try, and you're going to fail. Yeah. Obviously, you lasted 2 days.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, that's probably one day more than some other people, Pastor. So yes. That's a good way. Glass
it wasn't no days.
Yeah, it was no days. Yeah. I didn't really encounter those issues like that. That's the thing with me. It's when I share about like, people who know me, they're like, well, you were kind of just like Mr. Happy Days. You didn't really have any issues. I mean, I obviously had issues, but I wasn't an addict or didn't get a DUI. But I did do my share of some partying, but not to the extent where most of the people did. Yeah. I know I drove. I was the guy that had the high tolerance for alcohol.
Okay.
So there was times where I'd be driving on the 110 freeway coming from Pasadena, and I'd be side by side with a CHP officer, and I'm like just giving them the nod. Hey, how's it going? And I know I'm way over the limit, and but it's just I had that's the minute where it hit me that's like, okay, look, my friends thought it was like, oh, that's the greatest thing ever. You got a high tolerance. That's cool. For me, that was when it clicked. I was like, but I don't want to live this life. Right. And that's not a good thing. Right. And it was that moment, even though I was cool under pressure, it hit me. It's like, this isn't what I want. And I grew up in the church as well. My mom was Brimstone and fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and it kind of kept me away from church from that part, because she was a member of the Assemblies of God.
Oh,
so,
wow. Yeah.
So I would go to church, and it was just pretty much, everything I did was a sin. Mm-hmm. You listen to that music, that's a sin. So my mindset was like, well, if I'm going to hell in a handbasket because of everything, so where's the good news? And like I think I don't know if I shared it with you. I think the first time I actually truly heard the gospel was in boot camp in the Marine Corps, because on Sundays you were allowed to go to church. Okay. And you had 4 hours of free time. So all of a sudden, there was no atheists in the crowd. Everybody wanted to get away from the drill instructors and go to church. And I heard the gospel, like, life is tough, but you have Jesus. And, Jesus is forgiving you for your sins. It's not to say we're not going to. And I started hearing like, okay, so I'm going to get better as time goes. I'm never going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. The only perfect being was Jesus. Right. And I'm like, so where was this message when I used to go to church before? And that's when I kind of started going towards like salvation portion of my life. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm with Jesus. I got out from the Marines and started hanging, my friends. And that's when the whole drinking and going out again. And I was just like, no. And I would fall away and I'd come back, and I'd fall away and I'd come back. And it just finally, you get tired of it. It's almost like I would tell my wife, Rina, it's like you have that relationship where you're just going to that toxic relationship.
Oh yeah.
And you're being abused, and it's like, it's good for a minute. Then you figure out you're being abused, and then you just come back to the good side again.
Right.
And that's when it clicked for me. I'm just, no, I can't do this. And I asked God, I'm like, please, Lord, just, one, give me a woman that will follow you. And two, just lead me in the right way.
Yeah.
So he gave me the woman, and he's been leading me thus far. And it's just, like I said, there's bad days, there's great days, there's, in between days.
Yeah.
But man, when you come to church on Sunday, it's just like, oh yes, it's like a recharge. It's like,
right.
Oh, it's so good. It's so great because there's this great thing with community. I mean, because you can read. I listen to theologians on podcasts and all this during the week while I'm at work, but it's not the same as when you have that connection with people.
Right. When
you're here at church.
Yeah.
And it's been just such a blessing to be here.
Yeah.
And especially with the series where you're a Christian atheist. When I heard that, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Then I started hearing that, I was like, oh yeah, I can easily fall into that again. I probably have. That's not good. Yeah. So when you started preaching, I noticed Rina kind of she leans a little bit. She got really upright. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is good.
Yeah.
So, but good.
I'm glad it's helpful. I want to ask you, what would you say is because you were Assemblies of God, Fire and Brimstone, and then you understood the gospel in a new way. What would you say is the thing or the things that were so different that impacted you in a new way? Because I was talking about this. We had a men's barbecue last Sunday, and I was just talking about different things. But one of the things that I was talking about the toxicity that comes from a gospel that is based on fear. Because when you follow Jesus, you're following because you love him. Like it's a person that you want to follow, and it's an act of the will. Like you decide to follow Jesus. But then there's this other gospel that's being preached sometimes that it's if you don't follow Jesus, you're going to hell. Yeah. And that's a toxic gospel because it's fear based. It's almost like, if you're dating someone, you're like, hey, if you don't marry me, then I'm going to abuse you the rest of your life. Hey, that woman might marry you, but she's not marrying you because she loves you. She's marrying you because she doesn't want to be punished. So that's kind of that's what I think about when you say, fire and brimstone. And so what is it that changed? What was it that you heard that was new to you that was kind of like this revelation?
Okay. Well, the fire and brimstone to me, like I said, it was just everything you did was bad. Right. Which, I mean, I understand certain things are, but not everything. Yeah. And it was more fear-based. And I don't ever recall ever hearing about the love of Christ. Yeah. And so it was this thing where it's like, it's this evil dictator that's telling you got to do all these things. And if you don't do all these things, you're in trouble. If you have a bad moment, you better hope I cover you. So it's almost like you're trying to buy fire insurance. When I heard the true gospel, I heard about, yes, there is some fire and brimstone, obviously, but there is this love and acceptance. And you're not going to be perfect, but I need you to follow me. Yeah. And what I noticed is it becomes a relationship like like with my wife. I do things because I know that she unconditionally loves me and I unconditionally love her. Yeah. And it becomes a freeing love. Yeah. Where you do things because you just outright love the person. Yeah. And that's the relationship portion where you said with Jesus. And that's what I got, where God loves me. He knows that he's not surprised. Oh, Fernando messed up. Really? Where was I? Yeah. It became a thing that was freeing, that I am trying to live my life accordingly to what God has for me. He leaves room and grace for me because he knows I'm human.
Yeah.
He created me. He knows who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't trying to live this rigid life that was more dictated, where it's just, it just becomes a thing where it's like rules and regulations. And I'm trying to follow Jesus to please him because as he freely loved me and chose me and died for me, I want to freely love him and show him. And that's where, fruits come. Your good fruits come. Your good fruits come because you're trying to be one with Jesus. And that's kind of the differing point for me. It's like, I didn't think I had to be legalistic. Yes, there are things I need to avoid, but I do them freely now.
Right.
And it's just that whole relationship of feeling unconditional love, knowing that you're not going to be perfect, but if you take a step back and look at where you were at and where you are now, there's this world of difference where you don't even recognize that other person.
It's crazy. You're right.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I saw it at.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you're so right. I do see, for example, in myself, like I talk about, it's almost like I'm talking about another guy, like some guy I used to know. I don't know where that guy is anymore.
That guy, Josh, I don't know what happened to him.
Exactly. Now that there's always seeds. There's seeds of that old person that if you start watering those seeds, man, they're gonna sprout up probably pretty quick.
Yeah.
But then again, there's that whole thing about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and the fact that he paid for all of our sins. And the thing that was to me a revelation, and I think it's kind of what you're talking about here too, is there are many schools of thought that are human based. They're gospels that are man-centered, and it's all about behavior modification.
Yeah.
So you make the Christian life about the life of the Christian, and so it's man-centered. It's all about you. It's all about you and you changing and you getting better and all that kind of stuff. When it's really about Christ, and it's about what He did for us, and we're recipients of His love. We're recipients of His grace. And so, where does behavior modification fit into the equation? When we have been forgiven for everything. Like when Jesus says it is finished on the cross, he's not talking about, it is finished except for that little thing that you did, that's my sacrifice wasn't enough for that. I should have hung there a little longer for that one. Right. but that's not the case. Everything has been paid for on the cross. Yeah. And so, sin is no longer the issue.
No,
like sin is not, sin was absorbed by Christ completely on the cross. But we have a hard time with that one.
Yes.
I think a lot of Christians have a hard time with that one because there's the assumption that once we let that truth come into our heart, that we are fully forgiven, that all of a sudden we're going to start like going off the deep end and like, I can sin, I can do whatever I want. But the revelation is that that's not the way it works, because we know that we're not created for sin. Because sin is not a better way to live. Like it's not better to be greedy than to be generous.
No.
But the enemy sticks his tail in there, his proverbial tail in there, to confuse us into thinking that if we're greedy, we're going to be happier than if we're generous.
Yeah. When
in reality, living a life of integrity is truly a better life. It's because we're better off, because that's how we were created to live.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so that was something that I discovered after my re-encounter with Christ, because before that, it was all about you better behave or else.
Yeah.
So there was always that fear that just pulls you away from a life of love, of a loving relationship with Christ.
Yeah, most definitely.
And so if there was one underlying message that's underneath everything that I try to preach, it's that. You know, that whole idea that we are fully forgiven.
Yeah, I see you trying to hammer that home.
Yeah.
And it must be difficult as a pastor because you're dealing with multiple generations of people at a congregation.
Yeah.
And everyone's been raised different. So I know that because, even with my mom, sometimes I see some of the things she's watching on TV for, some certain pastors. And I'm like, that's not, I'm thinking in my mind, that's not the gospel. And sometimes I'll tell my mom, I'm like, Mom, you know what? that's not really the gospel.
Yep.
That's more of a prosperity thing. She goes,
Yep.
she goes, yeah, I know that. She goes, I take the good and the bad, I filter out.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, okay. She's that's how you live your faith.
Yeah.
She goes, you're going to encounter things that are going to be, man-centered. Leave those aside.
Yeah.
And, so it's like, yeah, it's definitely, it's because we try to make it about us because it's our human nature.
Yeah.
It's about me.
Right.
But it's not about me. It's about Jesus.
Well, and I'm not at all against like motivational speakers and all that kind of stuff. I listen to them, like a Tony Robbins, for example. I'm like, I love some of the guys. I get motivated, to work out, to eat healthy, to, work hard. And I think all those things are great.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is those aren't the gospel.
No.
And so when you mix, like when you have a pastor that's really not preaching the gospel, he's preaching a motivational speech and using the Bible almost as a pretext to do that. I'm like, just be a motivational speaker. And there's nothing wrong with being a motivational speaker. Just don't call yourself a pastor.
Yeah.
You probably make more money or do whatever, and it's fine, but it's not the gospel. See, that's where I think it gets a little squirrely.
Yeah. And that's usually the issue I have, because when I hear certain things where I'm like, okay, well, yeah, that's a good, it's, I'm gonna say, like when people say it's secular, but it's not necessarily bad.
No, not bad. No.
But that's good teaching.
Yeah.
For work habits, health habits, and things like that. But when people take that and then the problem is people take that and it's the gospel, and then they start living their life that, and when it doesn't work out, they blame God.
Exactly.
They never blame the pastor.
Right.
It's God.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
It wasn't God.
It's true. Yeah. Hey, well, this was good. This is a good conversation. We've been talking for 45 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, it went by quick.
Why does it seem like it's been like 10 minutes?
No, it's a good we need to do this again.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to do it again.
I was a little nervous.
Were you really?
Yeah. I it's funny. I don't like public speaking. But then I feel like this is more public because it'll be published.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thinking, hopefully I can talk. Hopefully, I can keep up a conversation.
Dude, this was really good. It was a blessing to me just hear your story, and when I hear stories like yours, it's a testimony to me that the thing that we profess is actually a real thing.
Yeah.
And God is still changing lives. He's still moving. He's still alive.
Amen to that.
So, yeah. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time.